Every parent knows that children see things adults miss. When widower Richard Harrington hired the elegant Miss Catherine Blackwood as his daughter's nanny, he thought he'd found the perfect solution to balance his demanding business empire with single fatherhood. The references were impeccable, her manner refined, her credentials beyond reproach. But 7-year-old Emma saw something else entirely. She began drawing pictures of shadows following the nanny, refused bedtime stories, and clung to her father whenever Miss Blackwood entered the room. Then came the night Emma tugged his sleeve and whispered those 5 words that would change everything. Don't trust the new nanny. What could a child possibly know that a successful businessman had missed?
Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you.
Richard Harrington stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his home office, watching his daughter Emma play alone in the garden below. The sight twisted something deep in his chest. 2 years had passed since Margaret's death, and still, Emma played tea party with empty chairs, setting a place for Mommy, who would never come. The pearl necklace in his hand caught the morning light, its lustrous surface unmarred by time. Margaret had worn it on their wedding day, on Emma's first birthday, on that last morning when she'd kissed them both goodbye. He'd meant to lock it away in the safe with the other valuables, but somehow it always found its way back to his desk drawer, a tangible reminder of all they'd lost. Mr. Harrington? His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. The quarterly reports are ready for your review. 10 minutes, Sandra, he replied, his voice steady despite the ache in his throat. 10 minutes. That's all the grief he could afford in a day that would stretch until well past Emma's bedtime. Such was the price of single-handedly running Harrington Technologies while raising a daughter who desperately needed her mother. Emma had been 5 when the police arrived that rain-soaked Tuesday morning. Too young to understand why Daddy was crying, why Mommy wouldn't wake up from her long sleep. The doctors called it an accident hydroplaning on a wet road, they said. A tragedy, but no one's fault. Richard had nodded numbly through their explanations, holding Emma's small hand while she asked when Mommy would come home from the hospital. The changes in Emma started small. She stopped singing the silly songs Margaret had taught her. Her vibrant crayon drawings turned monochrome. At school, her teacher reported she'd become withdrawn, preferring to read alone rather than play with other children. The child psychologist assured Richard it was normal grief behavior, that Emma would adjust with time and stability. But stability was exactly what Richard couldn't provide. Board meetings stretched into dinners. International calls disrupted. Bedtime stories. The parade of nannies began Mrs. Coleman, who left after 2 weeks citing personal reasons. Jennifer, the college student who couldn't handle Emma's silent treatment. Olga, who spoke limited English and frightened Emma with her stern demeanor. Each failed attempt deepened Richard's desperation. He built a technology empire for nothing, negotiated with Fortune 500 CEOs, but he couldn't find one reliable person to care for his daughter. The guilt gnawed at him during every missed school play, every dinner eaten at his desk while Emma ate with strangers. She needs consistency, the therapist had said. A maternal figure she can trust. Trust. Richard turned the pearl necklace over in his hands. Margaret had trusted so easily, seeing the good in everyone. She would have known instantly which nanny would be right for Emma. She would have seen through false smiles and hollow promises. But Margaret wasn't here, and Richard was fumbling in the dark, trying to be both mother and father while keeping their world from crumbling. The interview process had become a soul-draining ritual. Forms to review, references to check, trial days that inevitably ended with Emma in tears or stony silence. Sandra had started handling the initial screenings, weeding out the obviously unsuitable candidates. Even so, Richard had interviewed 12 women in the past month alone. Then came Catherine Blackwood's application. On paper, she seemed overqualified. A degree in child psychology from the Sorbonne, 5 years with a diplomatic family in Geneva, glowing letters of recommendation from people with names Richard recognized from the society pages. When Sandra had handed him the file, she'd actually smiled. "This one's different, Mr. Harrington. I have a good feeling." Richard had learned not to trust good feelings, but desperation made him hope. Emma needed someone. He needed someone. The house felt too large, too quiet, haunted by Margaret's absence in every empty room. He slipped the necklace into his jacket pocket and turned from the window. Emma had abandoned her tea party, wandering listlessly toward the house. Soon Mrs. Martinez would serve her lunch, eating alone at the massive dining table, while Richard conference called Tokyo. Tomorrow would bring another nanny interview, another stranger auditioning to fill an unfillable void in their lives. But maybe, just maybe, Catherine Blackwood would be different. Maybe she could bring some light back into Emma's eyes, some laughter back into these halls. Maybe she could help them both learn to live again, not just survive. Richard straightened his tie and headed for his desk. Hope was a luxury he couldn't afford, but for Emma, he would try once more. Catherine Blackwood arrived at the Harrington estate on a Thursday morning that sparkled with false promise. Richard watched from his study window as she emerged from a modest but well-maintained sedan, every movement deliberate and graceful. She wore a navy dress that suggested professional competence without severity, her dark hair pulled back in a style that Margaret might have worn to a parent-teacher conference. "She's here," Sandra announced unnecessarily through the intercom. Richard descended to the foyer, past portraits of 3 generations of Harringtons, their eyes seeming to follow his progress with judgment or encouragement. He could never decide. Which? Emma was at school, a deliberate choice. He'd learned not to involve her until he was certain not. Ms. Blackwood's handshake was firm, her smile warm, but not overeager. Up close, Richard noticed the intelligence in her gray eyes, the way she took in the grand entrance without being overawed. She was perhaps 40, with laugh lines that suggested experience with children's joy and chaos. "Mr. Harrington," she sighed, her voice carrying a faint European accent. "Thank you for considering me. Your home is lovely. Thank you. Shall we?" He gestured toward the sitting room, noting how she walked confident but respectful of the space. So many candidates had either tiptoed like intruders or strutted like presumptive mistresses of the house. The sitting room overlooked the garden, where Emma played her solitary games. Miss Blackwood's eyes went immediately to the child-sized furniture, arranged beneath the oak tree, the swing that hadn't been used in months. "Tell me about Emma," she said, settling into her chair with an attentiveness that seemed genuine. Not, "Tell me about the position," or "Let's discuss salary." "Tell me about Emma." Richard found himself relaxing fractionally. "She's 7. Brilliant, really already reading at a 4th grade level, but she's been struggling since her mother passed. Grief isn't linear, especially for children," Ms. Blackwood said gently. "They process loss in waves, sometimes appearing fine one day and devastated the next." "How long has it been?" 2 years. The words still scraped his throat. "We've tried therapy, various nannies. Nothing seems to connect." Miss Blackwood nodded, producing a leather folder. "May I share something with you?" Inside were her credentials, the Sorbonne degree, certificates in child development, first aid training. But what caught Richard's attention were the photographs. Miss Blackwood with children of various ages, all looking genuinely happy. A letter from a young girl named Sophia, thanking her for teaching her to be brave after Papa went to heaven. "I worked with the Beaumont family for 3 years," she explained. "Little Sophia lost her father in a skiing accident. I understand what Emma is experiencing." The interview continued for an hour. Every question Richard posed, she answered with thoughtful consideration. Her references were impeccable. A French ambassador, a Swiss banking executive, a member of British Parliament. She spoke 4 languages, had experience with gifted children, understood the unique challenges of wealthy single-parent households. Why leave such prestigious positions? Richard asked, the businessman in him probing for weakness. "I go where I'm needed most," she replied simply. "Your advertisement spoke of a little girl who needs more than a caretaker. That calls to me more than diplomatic immunity or Swiss finishing schools." When Emma returned from school, Richard held his breath. His daughter entered the sitting room with her usual wariness, clutching her backpack like a shield. Miss Blackwood didn't rush forward with false enthusiasm. Instead, she remained seated, offering a small smile. "You must be Emma," I'm Catherine. I like your backpack. Is that a constellation pattern? Emma's eyes widened slightly. Most adults saw generic stars. It's Orion, she said quietly. The hunter. Ms. Blackwood nodded. Did you know that in ancient Egypt, they believed Orion's belt pointed to the pyramids? For the next 20 minutes, Richard watched in amazement as Ms. Blackwood gently drew Emma out. They discussed stars, then books, then Emma shyly showed her latest drawings. Not once did Ms. Blackwood condescend or force interaction. When Emma eventually excused herself to change from her school uniform, she actually smiled at the woman. She's wonderful, Miss Blackwood said softly. Bright, cautious, deeply feeling. You've done well with her, Mr. Harrington. Richard hired her on the spot. The first week exceeded every hope. Miss Blackwood arrived punctually each morning, bringing subtle changes, fresh flowers in Emma's room, homemade cookies for after school, patience for the inevitable testing of boundaries. She handled Emma's moods with steady grace, neither pushing too hard nor allowing the child to retreat completely. She knows things, Emma told Richard one evening, wonder in her voice. Real things, not just pretend interested like the others. By the second week, Richard found himself trusting Miss Blackwood with the household schedule, Emma's routines, even some administrative tasks. She absorbed information efficiently, never needing to be told twice. When she mentioned that Emma had seemed anxious about an upcoming school project, she'd already helped her begin research. Standing in the doorway of Emma's room, watching Miss Blackwood help his daughter with homework, Richard felt something he hadn't experienced in 2 years. Hope. Emma was actually laughing at a story about constellations and ancient sailors. Perhaps they'd finally found their Mary Poppins, their saving grace. Perhaps life could be more than just enduring each day. He didn't notice how Ms. Blackwood's eyes catalogued every family photo, or how her questions about household routines seemed just a bit too detailed. He was too grateful for Emma's returning. Smiled to see anything but salvation in their perfect nanny. 3 weeks of domestic tranquility ended on a rainy Thursday afternoon. Richard was in his home office, reviewing contracts. When he heard the crash followed by Emma's piercing scream, he took the stairs 3 at a time, finding chaos in Emma's room. The antique music box, Margaret's music box, lay on its side on the dresser, its delicate ballerina frozen mid-pirouette. Emma stood backed against her bed, tears streaming down her face, while Miss Blackwood knelt nearby, hands raised in a placating gesture. Sweetheart, I was only trying to clean it, Miss Blackwood said soothingly. No, Emma shrieked, darting past the nanny to snatch up the music box, clutching it to her chest. You can't touch it. You can't. Emma. Richard kept his voice calm, despite his racing heart. What happened? His daughter's wild eyes fixed on him. She was going to take it. She said she needed to clean it, but she was going to take it. I would never, Ms. Blackwood began, but Richard raised a hand. Emma, go to my study. Take the music box with you. Emma fled, her sobs echoing down the hallway. Richard turned to Ms. Blackwood, who was rising gracefully from the floor, her expression a perfect blend of concern and hurt. I apologize, Mr. Harrington. The music box was dusty, and I thought it was her mother's, Richard said quietly. Emma hasn't let anyone touch it since Margaret died. Oh, Miss Blackwood's hand went to her heart. I had no idea. I should have asked. Poor dear, no wonder she was upset. Her response was flawless, appropriate remorse, genuine seeming empathy. Any reasonable person would accept it. But something cold was settling in Richard's stomach, a feeling he'd learned to trust. In business dealings. Perhaps we should call it a day, he suggested. Of course. I'll see myself out. Please tell Emma I'm so very sorry. After she left, Richard found Emma curled in his desk chair, the music box in her lap. She'd opened it, and the tiny ballerina spun to the tinkling melody of Claire de Lune, Margaret's favorite. Want to tell me what really happened? He asked gently. Emma's fingers traced the box's painted roses. She's been asking about it. Every day. Where did it come from? How much is it worth? Does it have a key? Today she waited until I was doing homework, and she had her phone out, Daddy. She was taking pictures of it. Richard felt his chest tighten. Pictures? Like she was going to sell it online. Like those shows where people find treasures in old houses. Emma looked up at him, her young face etched with an understanding that broke his heart. She pretends to care, but she doesn't. Not really. Emma, I know you needed her to help. I tried to like her, Daddy. I really did. But she's wrong. She asks wrong questions and looks at our things wrong and... Emma's voice dropped to a whisper. Sometimes I catch her smiling when she thinks no one's looking. Not a nice smile. A secret smile. Richard pulled his daughter into his arms, his mind racing. Children had vivid imaginations, especially grieving children. But Emma had never lied to him, never been one for dramatic tailies. I'll look into it, he promised. But Emma, I need you to be very careful. If you're right, and I'm not saying you are, but if you're right, we need to be smart. Can you do that? Act normal around her? Emma pulled back, studying his face. You believe me? I believe you saw something that worried you. Let me find out more, okay? That evening, after Emma was asleep, Richard sat in his study with a glass of whiskey he didn't touch. On his laptop, he scrolled through the photos from his phone casual shots from the past 3 weeks. There was Ms. Blackwood pushing Emma. On the swing, helping with the science project, serving afternoon tea in the garden. Normal scenes? Perfect scenes? Too perfect? He enlarged one photo, taken just days ago. Ms. Blackwood and Emma were bent over a puzzle, but in the background, barely. Visible, he could see the corner of his desk. And on it, papers he distinctly remembered filing away before leaving that morning. His phone buzzed. Sandra, texting despite the late hour. Mr. H. thought you should know accounting flagged some unusual inquiries about your personal expense. Accounts. Someone claiming to be updating household vendor info. They didn't release anything, but wanted you aware. Richard set down his phone and walked to Emma's room. She slept fitfully, one arm flung out, the other curled protectively around. The music box she'd insisted on keeping in her bed. On her desk lay her latest drawings. He flipped through them, his blood chilling with each page. The sunny pictures from 2 weeks ago had given way to darker scenes. A woman with long hair and shadows for eyes. A little girl surrounded by walls. And on the newest page, drawn in. Black crayon so hard it had torn through the paper in places. A figure standing over a bed, reaching down toward a small sleeping form. Don't trust the new nanny, Emma had whispered that very morning, tugging his sleeve as he prepared to leave. For work. He'd patted her head distractedly, promised to talk later, assumed it was more of her adjustment difficulties. Standing in his daughter's doorway, watching her clutch her mother's music box like a talisman against the dark, Richard made a decision. Emma had seen something he'd missed, blinded by his own desperate need for help. Tomorrow, he would smile at Miss Blackwood, thank her for her patience with Emma's outburst, and begin watching. Really watching. Because his daughter-wise, wounded. Wonderful Emma had tried to warn him, and this time he would listen. The diary was hidden exactly where Margaret would have suggested, beneath Emma's mattress, wrapped in a pillowcase decorated with stars. Richard found it while Miss Blackwood was downstairs preparing lunch. Emma at her Saturday art class. His hands shook slightly as he opened the small locked book. Emma had hidden the key in her music box, taped beneath the velvet lining. The first entries were typical 7-year-old observations. Today we had pizza. Ms. B doesn't like crusts. Saw 3 robins in the garden. But as he read on, the entries grew darker, more observant. Ms. B was on the phone in the pantry. She was speaking French, but not nice French, like Maman taught me. Angry French. She kept saying, "Bintet soon." Found Miss B in Daddy's office again. She said she was looking for more printer paper, but the supply closet is downstairs. Miss B asked me about Maman's jewelry, where Daddy keeps it. I said I didn't know. I lied. Is it bad to lie to stop badder things? Richard sat heavily on his daughter's bed. Each entry was dated, Emma's careful handwriting documenting incidents. He'd dismissed or never noticed. The child had been building a case with the methodical nature she'd inherited from him. She took pictures of the family photos in the hallway. Every single one. Why does she need pictures of our pictures? His phone vibrated. His assistant, working weekend hours as usual, Mr. H. IT Security, flagged multiple login attempts to your personal cloud storage. Failed password entries. Attempts originated from your home IP address. Thursday 2:47 p.m. Thursday afternoon. When he'd been in back-to-back video conferences and Emma at school. When only Miss Blackwood had been in the house, Richard replaced the diary carefully and went to his office. From his desk drawer, he retrieved a folder he'd barely glanced at during the hiring process. Miss Blackwood's references. Time to look. Closer. The letterhead was impressive. Embassy of France, Geneva. But something bothered him about the typography. He held it up to the light, ran his fingers across what should have been embossed official seals. Flat, high-quality printing. But printing nonetheless. He dialed the embassy's main number from their website, not the contact number provided in the letter. "I'm calling to verify employment references for a Catherine Blackwood," he said in his executive voice, the one that opened doors, and cut through bureaucracy. 20 minutes and 3 transfers later, he had his answer. No Catherine Blackwood had ever worked for the embassy. The cultural attaché whose signature graced the letter had been dead for 3 years. Richard's hands were steady now, his mind shifting into the cold clarity that had built his empire. He pulled up the background check Sandra had run, basic, surface level, the kind that verified addresses and checked for criminal records. Clean, of course. Too clean for someone who'd supposedly lived in 4 countries. A knock at his door made him look up. Ms. Blackwood stood there with a tea tray, her usual warm smile in place. "I thought you might like some tea. You've been working so hard." How thoughtful. He minimized his computer windows casually. "Emma's art class runs until 2 today." "Yes, I know." The teacher called to confirm pickup time. She set the tray on his desk, her eyes flickering across the visible papers. "Is everything all right? You seem tense." "Just business concerns." He lifted the teacup, pretending to sip. "Actually, I've been meaning to ask you mention working with the Beaumont family. I have a colleague who knows them." "Which branch of the family was it?" The slightest hesitation. "The Geneva Beaumonts, though they traveled extensively." Of course. There were no Geneva Beaumonts. He'd invented them just now. Sophie must be, 12 now? "Sophia," she corrected gently. "And she'd be 10. Such a sweet girl." In her reference letter, the child had been named Sophie. Richard smiled and nodded, filing away another lie. After she left, he poured the tea into the potted plant by his window, paranoid perhaps, but caution seemed warranted. He spent the next hour on the phone with contacts in Switzerland, France, and England. Each call painted the same picture. The credentials were fiction, the references ghosts. But who was she really? And what did she want? Richard heard the front door and Emma's voice, returned from art class. He locked his computer and went downstairs, finding his daughter showing Miss Blackwood her latest painting, a house surrounded by dark clouds, a single lit window in the attic. "It's very atmospheric," Miss Blackwood said carefully. "It's our house," Emma said. "And that's where I hide when I'm scared." The two adults' eyes met over Emma's head. Miss Blackwood smiled her perfect nanny smile. Richard smiled back, the kind of smile he used in hostile takeover negotiations. "Emma, why don't you wash up for lunch?" he suggested. As his daughter scampered away, Miss Blackwood began arranging the art supplies. "She's so imaginative. Though I do worry about these dark themes in her work." "Children process trauma in various ways," Richard said evenly. "I'm sure. You learned that at the Sorbonne." "Indeed." She aligned the brushes precisely. Professor Delacroix was particularly insightful on that subject. Richard nodded thoughtfully. He'd spent an hour confirming that no Professor Delacroix had taught child psychology at the Sorbonne in the past 20 years. "I'll be working from home more often," he said casually. "Want to spend more time with Emma. How wonderful." Her smile never wavered. She'd be thrilled. As she headed to the kitchen, Richard noticed something he'd missed before. The way she moved through his house with the confidence of ownership. The way her fingers trailed along the wallpaper as if measuring the walls. That evening, Emma sat beside him as he tucked her in, her diary now returned to its hiding place. "Daddy," she whispered, "I heard her on the phone again today. She said the father suspects nothing in French." Richard kissed her forehead, his heart heavy with the weight of what lay ahead. "You're very brave. You know that?" Mamang said, being. "Brave means doing the right thing, even when you're scared." She was right. He ensured the window locks were secure, checked the nightlight. "Keep writing in your diary, sweetheart. And remember, act normal around Miss Blackwood. Like a spy?" Despite everything, a hint of excitement crept into her voice, exactly like a spy. As he closed her door, Richard touched the pocket where he'd placed Margaret's pearl necklace. Tomorrow, he'd hire a real investigator. Tonight, he'd review every piece of security footage from the past 3 weeks. The game had begun, and the stakes were higher than any business deal he'd ever negotiated. This time, he was playing for his daughter's safety, and he never lost when it mattered. The security cameras arrived in boxes marked Home Automation Upgrade, a fiction Miss Blackwood accepted without question. Richard watched the technician install them, tiny, state-of-the-art devices hidden in smoke detectors, air vents, and decorative molding. The den, hallway, kitchen, and Emma's playroom would now be under constant surveillance. "Full remote access," the technician explained, showing Richard the phone app. "Motion-activated, night vision capable. Stores 30 days of footage on the cloud." That afternoon, while Ms. Blackwood supervised Emma's piano practice, Richard met with James Morrison, a private investigator recommended by his corporate security chief. Morrison was ex-Scotland Yard, with a kind of forgettable face that made him perfect for his profession. "I need to know everything about this woman," Richard said, sliding Miss Blackwood's employment folder across his desk. "Real name, history, associates, everything." Morrison studied the photos with professional detachment. "Any immediate danger to your daughter?" "I don't know. That's what terrifies me. I'll put a rush on it. Meanwhile, document everything. And Mr. Harrington? Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is." The first night of surveillance revealed Ms. Blackwood's nocturnal habits. At 2:17 a.m., the hallway camera activated. She moved through the house like a ghost, pausing at the family portraits Richard had noticed her photographing. In the den, she spent 12 minutes at his desk, her hands careful as she leafed through papers he'd deliberately left out, old tax documents, meaningless financial statements from closed accounts. She was hunting for something specific. The next morning, Richard found Martha, their housekeeper of 15 years, polishing silver in the butler's pantry. Martha had been with them since before Emma was born, a steady presence through joy and tragedy. "Martha, I need your help," he said quietly, checking that Miss Blackwood was occupied upstairs. "Has Miss Blackwood asked you any unusual questions?" The older woman's hand stilled on the tea service. "Now that you mention it, yes. Very interested in your family routines. When you travel, how often you work late. Asked about Mrs. Harrington, too, her family money, the trust arrangements." "What? Did you tell her?" "Nothing substantial. I've been around long enough to know when someone's fishing." Martha resumed polishing with vigor. "There's something off about that woman, Mr. Richard. The way she looks at things like she's pricing them for auction. I need you to keep an eye on her, carefully. Can you do that?" Martha's expression hardened. "For Emma, anything." 3 days into surveillance, Morrison called with preliminary findings. Richard took the call in his car, parked outside Emma's school. "Catherine Blackwood doesn't exist," Morrison said without preamble. "The real Catherine Blackwood died in infancy in Liverpool, 1979. Someone's using her identity." Richard's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "Who was she then?" "Still working on that. But I've found 2 similar cases: wealthy single parents, female nannies with impeccable false credentials. Both families reported significant thefts after the nanny disappeared. One family in Boston, another in Toronto. How significant? Boston family lost $2.3 million in bearer bonds. Toronto was worse: attempted kidnapping of the child for ransom. The nanny had accomplices." Richard felt ice in his veins. "Accomplices? It appears to be an organized operation. I'm liaising with Interpol now. Mr. Harrington, you need to be very careful. These people are professionals." That evening, Richard maintained his normal routine while his mind raced. Ms. Blackwood served dinner with her usual efficiency, helping Emma with her math homework afterward. To any observer, it was a scene of domestic tranquility, but Richard saw what he'd been blind to before, how she positioned herself to watch both exits, how her eyes tracked his movements, how she'd gradually inserted herself into every aspect of their lives. She wasn't just a nanny. She was conducting reconnaissance. After Emma's bedtime, he reviewed the day's footage in his locked study. At 3:47 p.m., while he'd been on a conference call, Ms. Blackwood had entered his office. The camera caught her photographing specific documents. With a small device, not a phone, something more sophisticated. She'd been interested in his investment portfolios, particularly the accounts held in trust for Emma. His daughter's inheritance from Margaret's family was substantial enough to set someone up for life if they could access it. As Emma's guardian, Richard controlled the trusts, but if something happened to him, a soft knock interrupted his thoughts. Ms. Blackwood stood in the doorway with her coat. "I'm heading home, Mr. Harrington. Emma's sleeping peacefully." "Thank you." "Oh, Catherine." He used her false name deliberately. "I've been meaning to ask, do you have any vacation plans?" "Want to ensure we have coverage." "No plans currently. I'm quite happy here." Her smile seemed genuine, which made it more chilling. "This feels like home." After she left, Richard armed the security system and called Morrison. "I need protection. Details on the house, discreet, and run background checks on any associates she might have in the area." "Already on it. I'll have someone in place by tomorrow." Richard climbed the stairs to check on Emma, finding Martha in the hallway. "I stayed late," she explained. "Wanted to make sure everything was locked up proper." "Thank you, Martha." He squeezed her shoulder gratefully. "I don't know what we'd do without you." "You'll never have to find out. That woman might fool others, but she doesn't fool me." "I caught her in your study today, Mr. Richard. Bold as brass, going through your desk." "I know. We're handling it." Martha's eyes flashed. "Your Margaret would have seen through her in an instant. Had a sixth sense about people. She did." As if in response, they heard a sound from Emma's room. Both rushed in to find the child sitting up in bed, tears on her cheeks. "Bad dream, sweetheart?" Richard gathered her into his arms. "She was in my dream," Emma whispered. "Ms. Blackwood, she was taking me away, and you couldn't find me, and I kept calling, but you couldn't hear me." Richard held his daughter tighter, meeting Martha's eyes over her head. The housekeeper's expression was fierce, protective. "Just a dream," he soothed. "I'm here. Martha's here. You're safe." But as he settled Emma back to sleep, Richard knew they were running out of time. Ms. Blackwood, whoever she really was, had a plan. And every instinct he'd honed in 20 years of business told him they were approaching the endgame. Tomorrow, he'd get answers. Tonight, he'd stand guard over his daughter's dreams. Margaret's pearls in his pocket like a promise. He wouldn't let them down. Not again. The footage from 3 a.m. was damning. Richard sat in his locked study, watching Ms. Blackwood work with surgical precision. She'd disabled the desk lamp, thinking it would hide her activities, not knowing about the infrared camera in the air vent. Every movement was captured in ghostly green clarity. She photographed his financial statements with a device no larger than a lipstick tube, her fingers flying across pages with practiced efficiency. But it was what she did next that chilled him. She produced a small notebook and began copying Emma's trust fund details by hand, paying special attention to the succession clauses. Morrison's call came as Richard. We watched the footage for the third time. "I've identified her," the investigator said. "Real name is Natasha Volkov, originally from Belarus. She's been operating under various identities for 12 years. Always the same pattern wealthy single parents, always with young children, who stand to inherit significant assets. The families you mentioned before, she was involved in both cases. Never caught, always one step ahead. The Toronto family identified her from surveillance footage, but she'd vanished. That was 18 months ago." Richard paused the video on a clear shot of her face. "What else?" "She's not working alone. Never does. Usually has 2 or 3 accomplices, someone for logistics, someone for muscle if things go wrong. They spend months preparing, learning everything about the family before making their move. What kind of move? Morrison's pause was heavy with implication. Best case, they drain accessible accounts and disappear. Worst case, they arrange accidents. Make it look like the grieving child needs a guardian, someone who's conveniently been caring for them. Richard's blood turned to ice. They kill the parents? Suspected in at least one case, never proven. After ending the call, Richard unlocked his desk drawer and retrieved the forged passport Martha had discovered that afternoon. She'd found it tucked behind books in the guest room, Ms. Blackwood sometimes used for overnight shifts. The photograph was definitely their nanny, but the name read Elena Castillo with Spanish nationality. How many identities did she have? How many families has she destroyed? His phone buzzed with a text from Martha. Found something else. Richard met her in the kitchen, where she produced a brass key. Was in her coat pocket when she asked me to hang it up, Martha whispered. Looks like a safety deposit box key. Richard examined it, unmarked, generic. Could belong to any bank in the city, or none of them. But it was evidence of secrets, of plans beyond their household. The next morning brought a breakthrough. Morrison had pulled traffic camera footage from the night Miss Blackwood claimed to go home to her modest apartment across town. The apartment existed, had been rented in Catherine Blackwood's name, but she rarely went there. Instead, she drove to an upscale hotel downtown, where she was registered under yet another name. The security footage Morrison obtained through channels Richard didn't inquire about showed her meeting with two men in the hotel bar. The audio was poor, but their body language spoke volumes. Subordinates reporting to a superior. I need you to watch Emma closely tomorrow, Richard told Martha that evening. Don't let her out of your sight. What are you planning? Miss Blackwood mentioned a dental appointment tomorrow afternoon. I'm going to follow her. Martha gripped his arm. Be careful, Mr. Richard. These people ... I know, but I need to know what we're really dealing with. The next day, Richard left his office early, stationing himself where he could watch the house. At 2 p.m. sharp, Ms. Blackwood emerged, checking her surroundings with the casual efficiency of someone accustomed to surveillance. Richard followed at a distance, his anonymous rental car blending with afternoon traffic. She didn't go to any dentist. Instead, she drove to a storage facility on the outskirts of the city. Richard parked across the street, watching through binoculars as she accessed a unit. She emerged carrying a small duffel bag, loading it carefully into her trunk. His phone rang. Morrison. We've found more, the investigator said urgently. Natasha Volkov is wanted in connection with a death in Switzerland 3 years ago. A banker's wife died in a car accident brake failure. Volkov was the family's au pair, disappeared the day before. Richard's hands trembled as he watched Miss Blackwood drive away. Margaret's accident. The police had been so certain. Wet roads. Hydroplaning. But what if ... He returned home to find Emma in the garden with Martha, playing a clapping game. Safe, protected, but for how long? That night, after Miss Blackwood left, Richard searched her usual spaces with new purpose. In the guest room closet pushed far back, he found a leather satchel. Inside, 3 more passports with her photo and different names, $10,000 in cash, and a burner phone. The phone had one number in its contacts, labeled only V. Richard photographed everything and returned it exactly as found. Let her think her secrets were safe a little longer. In his study, he opened his safe and touched Margaret's pearls. Then the legal documents beneath his will, Emma's trust papers, the letter Margaret had written for Emma's 18th birthday, all the things that would matter if something happened to him. I caught her in here again today. Richard spun too. Find Martha in the doorway. She had some kind of electronic device. Ran it over the safe, like she was scanning it. When she saw me, she pretended to be dusting. The safe is biometric and has a time delay. She can't access it. No, but she's trying hard to figure out what's inside. Martha stepped closer. Mr. Richard, I think it's time to involve the police. Soon. Morrison says we need more concrete evidence. Right now, it's all circumstantial. Martha's expression was grim. Don't wait too long. That woman looks at Emma like she's measuring her for something. Gives me the chills. After Martha left, Richard reviewed the day's footage. There was Ms. Blackwood in Emma's room, standing over his sleeping daughter for a full 3 minutes, just watching. Her expression was unreadable, calculating. He thought of the storage unit, the duffel bag now hidden in her car. Were they preparing to run, or preparing for something worse? Richard made a decision. Tomorrow, he'd confront her, not directly, but he'd begin laying his own trap. He had one advantage. She didn't know he knew. And in business as in war, the best defense was a carefully planned defense. Checking on Emma one last time, he found her sleeping peacefully, the music box on her nightstand playing its gentle melody. She'd insisted on keeping it close ever since the incident. "I won't let her hurt you," he whispered. "I promise." In the morning, he'd begin the endgame. But tonight, he'd guard his daughter's door and plan the downfall of Natasha Volkov, or whatever her real name was. The hunter was about to become the hunted. The burner phone hidden in Miss Blackwood's satchel became the key that unlocked everything. Morrison's technical expert cracked it in less than an hour, revealing a web of deception that made Richard's stomach churn. They call themselves the Inheritance Project, Morrison explained, spreading printed screenshots across Richard's desk. 12 operatives working in cells across North America and Europe. They target wealthy single parents with young heirs. Richard studied the encrypted messages, his executive mind parsing the criminal organization's structure. This is sophisticated, almost corporate. That's because it is. The man at the top, Alexei Volkov, Natasha's brother, has an MBA from Wharton. He's turned family theft into a business model. The messages painted a chilling picture. Natasha had been reporting on every aspect of the Harrington household. Richard's travel schedule, Emma's routines, security weaknesses, staff loyalties. But one thread made Richard's blood run cold. Asset approaching optimal age. Guardian accident. Scenario prepared. Timeline, 2 to 3 weeks. "They're planning to kill me," Richard said quietly. Morrison nodded grimly. The Boston family patriarch died in a boating accident 6 months after hiring their nanny. Officially ruled accidental. But now, Richard thought of Margaret, of rain-slicked roads and failed brakes. His hands clenched into fists. "There's more," Morrison continued. "They have a lawyer inside family services, someone who ensures their operatives become emergency guardians when parents die unexpectedly. The children's trust funds are drained within months, the kids shuttled into the system or worse. Worse? 3. Children from targeted families have disappeared over the past 5 years. Never found. Richard stood abruptly, pacing to the window where he could see Emma playing in the garden with Martha. His daughter's laughter carried on the wind, innocent and trusting. "We need the FBI," he said. "Already contacted them. Agent Sarah Chun will be here within the hour. She's been tracking this organization for 3 years." While they waited, Richard reviewed more evidence. The storage unit Miss Blackwood had visited contained supplies for multiple identities, cash in various currencies, and disturbingly, detailed files on 6 other families' future targets. Agent Chun arrived precisely on time, a compact woman with sharp eyes and an air of quiet authority. She listened to their evidence, studied the documents, and made a call to her team. "This is the break we've been waiting for," she said. "Natasha Volkov is the key to dismantling the entire network. But we need her to make contact with her accomplices, give us probable cause for the whole organization." "You want to use my daughter as bait?" Richard's voice was ice. "No, I want to use you." Chun leaned forward. "Make her think you're planning to change your will, maybe cut back on security. Give her a reason to accelerate their timeline. We'll be watching every second." Richard thought of Emma's nightmares, of Margaret's last morning. "And if something goes wrong? We'll have agents positioned around your property. The moment she makes a move, we intervene." That evening, Richard played his part. Over dinner, he casually mentioned to Miss Blackwood that he was meeting with his lawyer next week. "Estate planning review," he said, watching her reaction. "Emma's getting older. Time to reconsider some of the trust structures." Ms. Blackwood's eyes flickered with interest. How prudent. Children's needs do change as they grow. I'm also thinking of taking a vacation. Just Emma and me. Maybe sailing in the Caribbean. He saw it, then a flash of calculation behind her. Concerned expression. Sailing? Do you have much experience? Some. Nothing like the open ocean to clear your head, make big decisions. After she left for the evening, Agent Chun called. She made contact. 3 calls to the number marked V. They're moving up their timeline. Richard found Emma in her room, carefully arranging her stuffed animals for bed. His heart ached at her innocence, at how close she'd come to losing everything. Daddy? She looked up at him with Margaret's eyes. Is Ms. Blackwood going away soon? Children's intuition never ceased to amaze him. Why do you ask, sweetheart? She looked at me different today, like she was saying goodbye. Emma clutched. Her favorite bear. I won't miss her. Richard sat on her bed, pulling her close. You've been very brave through all this. Mommy would be proud. I remember what she said about being careful who we trust. Emma's voice was small, but steady. Miss Blackwood pretends to care, but her eyes are empty. Like the dolls in the antique store. From the mouths of babes, Richard thought. His 7-year-old had seen through a deception that fooled adults across continents. Later, reviewing the intercepted communications with Chung and Morrison, the full scope became clear. The accident was planned for next Tuesday, a brake failure on the winding road to Richard's office. Ms. Blackwood would be conveniently positioned to comfort Emma, to step into the guardian role she'd been cultivating. The organization had done this before. Would do it again if they weren't stopped. Richard stared at the evidence spread before him. Photos of grieving children, drained bank accounts, families destroyed by greed, dressed up as caregiving. The arrest needs to be public, Sean said, big enough to make international news. That's the only way to warn other potential victims. And Emma? Richard asked. How do I explain this to her? Children are resilient, Morrison offered, especially when they know they were heard, that their instincts were validated. Richard thought of his daughter's drawings, her whispered warnings, her stubborn refusal to trust despite her desperate need for maternal care. She'd been the hero of this story from the beginning. That night, unable to sleep, Richard found himself in Margaret's study, a room he'd barely entered since her death. Her legal papers were still filed precisely where she'd left them, including notes from her final charity board meeting. Among them, a detail that made his blood chill, a notation about a new volunteer who'd asked numerous questions about board members' families. The date was 1 week before Margaret's accident. They'd been circling his family like sharks for months before striking. Richard picked up the photo from Margaret's desk, their little family at Emma's 5th birthday party. All 3 of them covered in cake and laughing. They'd been so happy, so unaware of the danger stalking them. I'm sorry I didn't protect you, he whispered to Margaret's image. But I'll protect her. I swear it. A sound from the hallway made him turn. Martha stood there in her robe, holding 2 cups of tea. Figured you couldn't sleep either, she said, handing him a cup. Tomorrow's the day? Monday. Chun wants the weekend to position all the assets. Martha nodded, settling into Margaret's reading chair with the familiarity of old friendship. She'd be proud, you know, how you've handled this, how you've trusted. Emma, I almost didn't. Almost dismissed it as childhood fears. But you didn't. That's what matters. Martha sipped her tea thoughtfully. That little girl has her mother's gift for seeing people's true nature. It's going to serve her well in life. They sat in comfortable silence, 2 guardians preparing for the final battle. Outside, Richard's security team patrolled the grounds. Inside, high-tech surveillance captured every movement. And somewhere in the city, FBI agents prepared to dismantle a criminal empire built on the graves of loving parents. The Inheritance Project had made a fatal error. They'd chosen a family that refused to be broken, a child whose innocence was armor-plated with wisdom, and a father whose love was stronger than their greed. Monday would bring justice. But tonight, Richard stood watch one more time, Margaret's presence almost tangible in the room where she'd planned charity events and written love notes to leave in Emma's lunchbox. Almost over, he said softly, whether to Martha, to Margaret's memory, or to himself. He wasn't sure. No, Martha corrected gently. almost beginning, you and Emma starting fresh. That's what she would want. Richard nodded, feeling the truth of it. Monday would end the nightmare, but it would also begin their new life scarred, but stronger, tested but triumphant. The Harrington family would survive. More than that, they would thrive. And somewhere in whatever came after, Margaret would be smiling. Sunday morning dawned gray and oppressive, matching Richard's mood as he prepared for what Agent Sean called the final chess move. But it was Emma who delivered the shock that changed everything. "Daddy, I want to show you something in my music box," she said after breakfast. While Miss Blackwood cleaned up in the kitchen. In his study, Emma carefully opened the antique box. The ballerina spun to its haunting melody as she lifted the velvet lining, something Richard had never seen her do before. "Mommy showed me the secret compartment when I was 5. She said it was for very important things only." Beneath the lining lay an envelope, yellowed at the edges. Richard's name was written across it in Margaret's distinctive handwriting. His hands trembled as he opened it. "My dearest Richard," the letter began. "If you're reading this, something has happened to me, and I need you to know the truth. I've recently discovered information that puts our family at risk, and I fear I may not have time to tell you in person. There's a woman who has been watching us. She approached me at several charity events, always with different names, but the same face. She asks about you, about Emma, about our finances. I hired a private investigator, James Morrison, who uncovered something terrifying. This woman is part of an organization that targets families like ours. I'm meeting with Morrison tomorrow to get his full report. I've told no one else about this meeting, not even Martha. If something happens to me on the way, know it wasn't an accident. The woman's name is Natasha Volkov. Morrison has her photo and more information. Protect Emma. Trust your instincts. And remember, I will always love you both, even from beyond. All my love, Margaret. P.S. I've hidden Morrison's preliminary report in my jewelry box, behind the pearl necklace I wore on our wedding day." Richard felt the world tilt. Margaret had known. She'd been investigating the very organization that likely killed her. And Morrison, the same investigator now helping him, had worked for Margaret first. "Daddy?" Emma's worried voice broke through his shock. "Are you okay? When did Mommy tell you about the secret compartment?" "The day before ... Emma's voice hitched. "A day before she didn't come home. She said it was our special secret, that I should only show you if I felt really scared. And I'm really scared, Daddy." Richard pulled his daughter close, his mind racing. He called Morrison immediately. "You worked for my wife," he said without preamble. A long pause. "Yes. You knew about Natasha Volkov before she came to work for us. You knew what happened to Margaret wasn't an accident. I suspected, but I had no proof, and you were grieving. When you contacted me about Miss Blackwood, I recognized her immediately. I've been waiting 2 years for another chance at these people. You should have told me. Would you have believed me?" A grieving widower being told his wife was murdered by some shadowy organization, Morrison sighed. "I needed evidence. Now we have it." Richard found Margaret's jewelry box in the master bedroom closet, untouched since her death. Behind the pearls, exactly where she'd said, was a manila envelope. Inside, photographs of Natasha at charity events, reports on the inheritance project's structure, and a chilling note in Margaret's handwriting. They're planning something. Soon. Agent Shun arrived within minutes of Richard's call, her expression grim as she reviewed the new evidence. "This changes our timeline," she said. "If Volkov realizes we have Margaret's investigation materials, she'll run. We need to move now." "It's Sunday. She's here all day on Sundays," Richard said. "Perfect. We'll stage it carefully. Can you get Emma somewhere safe?" Richard thought quickly. "Martha can take her to the Children's Museum. They have a special exhibit Emma's been wanting to see." As if summoned by her name, Miss Blackwood appeared in the doorway. "Is everything all right? Emma seems upset." Richard forced normalcy into his voice. "She found some of her mother's things. It brought up memories." Miss Blackwood's expression shifted to one of practiced sympathy. "Poor dear. These discoveries can be so difficult. Perhaps some distraction? I could take her to the park." "Actually," Martha's taking her to the museum. But thank you. Something flickered in her eyes, frustration, suspicion. But she smiled and withdrew. Within an hour, Martha had Emma safely away from the house. FBI agents positioned themselves around the property. Richard waited in his study, Margaret's letter on his desk, her pearls in his pocket. At precisely 2 p.m., Miss Blackwood knocked. "Mr. Harrington? There's something I need to discuss with you. Come in." She entered carrying a tea tray unasked for, unnecessary. Richard noticed her hands were steady as she poured, but there was a tension in her shoulders. "I've been thinking about your sailing trip," she began. "The Caribbean can be dangerous this time of year. Perhaps you should reconsider." "My wife loved sailing," Richard said quietly. "Did you know that?" The teacup rattled slightly as she set it down. "I don't believe you've mentioned it." "No? Strange. You seem to know so much about her." "About us." He lifted Margaret's letter. "She wrote about you, you know, before she died." The mask finally slipped. Natasha Volkov's eyes went cold and calculating, all pretense of warmth vanishing. "She was too curious for her own good," Natasha said softly. "Just like you. You killed her." "The organization killed her. I was merely ... reconnaissance. But when she started investigating, well," she shrugged elegantly. "Business is business." "And Emma? What's your business with my daughter?" "Your daughter was never supposed to exist. Margaret was supposed to die before having children. Cleaner that way. But you rushed into marriage, had a baby so quickly. It complicated things." Richard's hand moved toward the panic button Sean had given him, but Natasha was faster. A small pistol appeared from beneath her cardigan. "I wouldn't. My associates are already in position. One call from me, and they move on the museum." "Did you really think we didn't know about your FBI friends?" Richard's blood froze. Emma. Natasha smiled, the expression chilling on a face that had shown such false warmth. "Now, let's discuss how this ends. You're going to sign some papers, transfer certain accounts, and then take that sailing trip you mentioned. Accidents happen at sea. Emma will be so devastated. She'll need her dear Nanny more than ever. She knows what you are. She's always known. Children can be convinced of anything, given time and the right ... pressure." Natasha glanced at her watch. "You have 5 minutes to decide. Your daughter's life or your pride. What would Margaret choose?" Richard stared at the woman who'd killed his wife, who planned to steal his daughter's future. Margaret had seen. Through her, had tried to protect them even at the cost of her own life. "She'd choose to trust the plan," he said quietly. Natasha's eyes narrowed. "What plan?" "The one where you just confessed to murder while being recorded by devices you'll never find." Richard smiled coldly. "The one where your associates at the museum are already in custody. The one where you thought you were hunting us, but we've been hunting you." The door burst open. Agent Chun and her team flooded in, weapons drawn. Natasha's finger twitched on the trigger, but Richard was already moving, throwing himself sideways, as Margaret had taught him in their self-defense classes. The shot went wide. Agents swarmed Natasha, and within seconds, she was on the ground, handcuffed and snarling curses in 3 languages. "Emma's safe," Sean assured Richard immediately. "We grabbed the accomplices 20 minutes ago." Richard sagged with relief, clutching Margaret's pearls. They'd done it. But more importantly, Margaret had done it. Even in death, she'd protected her family. "Your wife was remarkable," Morrison said quietly, appearing at Richard's shoulder. "I'm sorry I couldn't save her. But we saved Emma. That has to count for something." As they led Natasha away, she turned back, her eyes venomous. "This isn't over. The organization is finished," Sean interrupted. "Your brother was arrested in Prague an hour ago, along with 6 other members. Your lawyer inside Family Services gave up everyone to save herself. It's over." Richard watched them take away the woman who'd invaded his home, his life, his daughter's trust. Justice for Margaret, finally, but it wasn't over. Not yet. There was still a little girl who needed to know she was safe, who deserved the truth about her mother's courage. And there was a father who finally understood that sometimes the monsters under the bed are real, But so are the angels watching. Over us. Margaret had been both warrior and angel. Now it was Richard's turn to be both for Emma. The arrest of Natasha Volkov was kept strictly confidential. To the outside world, and more importantly, to any remaining members of the Inheritance Project, nothing had changed. Agent Chun's strategy was elegant in its deception. Use Natasha's phone and codes to draw out every last conspirator. We need the European cells, Chun explained Monday morning in Richard's study. Natasha's arrest will trigger failsafes unless she reports in. We need you to play along for 48 more hours. Richard stood at his window, watching Emma in the garden with Martha and 2 plainclothes FBI agents posing as gardeners. His daughter was safe, but the threat wasn't over. What do you need me to do? Proceed with the will changes you mentioned. Make it public. Visit your lawyer. Let people see you. We'll have Natasha's phone send updates about your plans. Meanwhile, we're preparing coordinated raids across 6 countries. Morrison spread documents across the desk. We've created a false codicil to your will. It appears to give significant control to Emma's guardian in the event of your death. Exactly what they'd want to see. Richard reviewed the paperwork, an elaborate fiction designed to be irresistible bait. And Natasha? Cooperating to reduce her sentence. She's confirming meeting locations, identifies, protocols. Turns out she's not as loyal to her brother as he believed. That afternoon, Richard made a very public visit to his attorney's office, carrying a leather portfolio and looking appropriately serious. The FBI's technical team used Natasha's phone to send coded messages. Target reviewing will. Major changes planned. Opportunity window opening. The responses came quickly. The organization was interested. Very interested. Back home, Richard found Emma in his study, drawn to her mother's music box, which now sat on his desk. Ms. Blackwood isn't coming back, is she? Emma asked quietly. Richard knelt beside his daughter. No, sweetheart, she's not. Because she was bad? Because she wanted to hurt us like she hurt Mommy? The weight of truth versus innocence pressed on Richard's heart. How did you know that? Emma touched the music box gently. I dream about Mommy sometimes. She tells me things. She said to be brave, that you would figure it out. She looked up at him with those old soul eyes. She said Ms. Blackwood had empty places where love should be. Richard pulled her close, marveling at the mystery of children's intuition, or perhaps something more. You were so brave. You tried to warn me from the beginning. I was scared you wouldn't believe me. I should have listened sooner. I'm sorry. Emma nestled against him. Mommy says it's okay. She says you did the right thing when it mattered. That evening, Chun's team intercepted a flurry of communications. The European cells were mobilizing, sensing opportunity. A man named Viktor Alexei Volkov's lieutenant was flying in from Berlin. 2 others were driving from Montreal. They thought they were closing in on the biggest score in the organization's history. We need the family lawyer angle, Chun said during a secure call. Someone who can provide legal legitimacy if Richard has his accident. Richard's jaw tightened. You have someone in mind? Patricia Morse, the family services contact. She's been suspicious about Natasha's silence, but hasn't run. We think she's waiting for instructions. So I meet with her? Tomorrow. Express concerns about your current guardian. Arrangements for Emma. Mention you're looking for someone with government connections. See if she takes the bait. Richard spent the night reviewing Chun's briefing materials on Morse, a respected family. Court advocate by day, she'd been placing criminal associates as emergency guardians for 8 years. 15 children had lost their inheritances through her machinations. 3 had disappeared entirely. The next morning, Martha helped maintain the illusion of normalcy, getting Emma ready for school while armed agents posed as household staff. Richard noticed his daughter watching everything with those knowing eyes. Are the gardeners really gardeners? She whispered to him at breakfast. What do you think? Emma studied them through the window. They stand like soldiers. Like Grandpa. Used to. Margaret's father had been career military. They're protecting us? Yes. Good. She returned to her cereal with the pragmatism of a child who'd learned too young that the world held real dangers. The meeting with Patricia Morse was Set for 2 p.m. at a downtown cafe public, safe, wired for sound. Richard arrived early. Chun's team already in position at surrounding tables. Morse was exactly what he expected. Mid-50s, professionally dressed, with the practiced warmth of someone who'd made a career of gaining trust. She carried a briefcase that probably held forged documents for any scenario. "Mr. Harrington," she greeted him. "I was surprised to get your call. How can I help?" Richard deployed his executive persona, concerned, but controlled. "I'm updating my estate plans. Recent events have made me realize I need better arrangements for Emma if something happens to me." "Recent events?" She leaned forward with practiced concern. "My current nanny has been disappointing. I'm realizing I need someone with more official standing. Someone who understands the system." He saw the spark in her eyes. Interest, calculation. Family court can be complex. Private arrangements often fall apart under scrutiny. "Exactly. I need someone with government credentials. Someone who could step in immediately if needed." He paused significantly. "I travel frequently. Accidents happen." Morse nodded slowly. "I might know someone. A colleague who specializes in emergency guardianship placement. Very discreet, very experienced with families of means. I'd need to meet them soon. I'm taking a sailing trip next week. Want everything settled before I go." "Sailing can be dangerous," she said carefully. "Especially single-handed. I'm aware." Their eyes met across the table. In that moment, Richard saw her recognition. He was exactly the kind of mark they looked for. Wealthy, isolated, with a young heir. "I'll make some calls," Morse promised. "Can we meet tomorrow? Same time?" "Perfect." After she left, Chun's voice came through Richard's earpiece. "Beautiful. She's calling Victor now." They're discussing moving up their timeline. Back home, Richard found Emma and Martha baking cookies, a normal activity in deeply abnormal times. His daughter looked up at him with flour on her nose. "Did you catch more bad people?" she asked quietly. "We're working on it," Emma nodded solemnly. "Mommy would be proud." That night, Shun's team tracked 17 calls between conspirators. The European cells were converging, drawn by the promise of the Harrington fortune. Victor had landed at JFK. The Montreal team was 3 hours out. "Tomorrow is the crescendo," Shun told Richard. "Morse will bring Victor to the meeting, presenting him as your potential guardian solution. When they make their move, we'll have everyone." Richard stood in Emma's doorway, watching her sleep with her mother's music box on the nightstand. Tomorrow, they'd end this properly. Every person who'd participated in Margaret's murder, who'd threatened Emma's future, would face justice. The trap was set. The prey was gathering. And Richard Harrington, businessman, widower, father, was ready to spring it. "We've got movement." An agent's voice crackled through the communication system. 2 vehicles approaching the designated meeting site. Richard straightened his tie, checked the recording device hidden in his watch, and prepared for the performance of his life. Not for his company, not for wealth, but for the 2 girls who held his heart, one watching from heaven, one counting on him from earth. Time to end this. The law offices of Garrett, Holbrook, and Associates had been chosen carefully. Top floor, limited exits, perfect for containment. Richard arrived at 2 p.m. sharp, his leather portfolio containing the fabricated will documents that would serve as bait for the final confrontation. Patricia. Morse waited in the conference room with a man she introduced as David Brennan, though Richard knew from Chun's intelligence his real name was Victor Volkov. He was younger than expected, perhaps 35, with the kind of forgettable features that would serve well in his line of work. "Mr. Brennan specializes in family advocacy," Morse explained smoothly. "He's helped numerous single parents establish continuity plans for their children." Victor extended his hand. His grip was firm, calculated. "Mr. Harrington, Patricia has told me about your situation. I believe I can help." Richard settled into his chair, placing the portfolio prominently on the table. Through his earpiece, Chun whispered, 2 more entering the building. "Hold steady." "I appreciate you meeting on short notice," Richard began. "As I told Patricia, I'm concerned about Emma's future if something happens to me." "A prudent concern," Victor said. His English carried a slight accent he was trying to hide. Children who lose both parents often face tremendous upheaval. Having a designated guardian already integrated into their lives can make all the difference. Exactly. My current nanny has been ... problematic. I need someone with more official standing. Morse leaned forward. David has impeccable credentials. Former child services, now private practice. He could begin spending time with Emma immediately, establishing that crucial bond. Richard pretended to consider this. I'd need to review your background thoroughly. Of course. Victor produced a folder, no doubt, filled with forged documents, as convincing as Natasha's had been. I've brought my complete history for your review. The signal is degrading, Chun's voice crackled. In Richard's ear. Technical team is addressing. Maintain normal conversation. Richard's pulse quickened, but he kept his expression neutral. He opened Victor's folder, making a show of reviewing the false credentials, while his mind raced. If they lost surveillance. CAPABILITIES. Tell me about your experience with inherited wealth, Richard said, buying time. Emma's trust fund is substantial. Victor's eyes gleamed. I've managed several cases involving significant assets. The key is maintaining the child's lifestyle while being prudent with investments. Of course, as guardian, I would work closely with your existing financial advisors. Or replace them if necessary, Richard suggested. If that's what's best for Emma, absolutely. The lies flowed so smoothly. Richard thought of Margaret, of how these people had destroyed families without a flicker of conscience. His hand moved unconsciously to his pocket, where her pearls rested. Mr. Harrington? Morse prompted. Are you all right? Fine. Just thinking about my wife. She would have been very particular about who cared for Emma. A mother's instincts, Victor said sympathetically. I'm sure she would want Emma protected. At all costs. She died trying to protect her, Richard said quietly. Did Patricia mention that? A brief glance between the conspirators. A tragic accident, I understood, Victor said carefully. That's what everyone thought. But recently, I've learned differently. The atmosphere in the room shifted. Morse's hand moved toward her purse. Victor's posture changed subtly. A predator. Sensing danger. Communications restored. Chun's voice returned, clear and urgent. All teams in position. Draw them out. Richard placed Natasha's phone on the table. Interesting thing about accidents. They often leave digital footprints. Victor went very still. I don't understand. No? Let me be clear. Richard pulled out printed screenshots of the encrypted messages. Asset approaching optimal age. Guardian accident scenario prepared. Timeline, 2 to 3 weeks. He looked up. That's about me, isn't it? Morse stood abruptly. We should go. Sit down. Patricia. Richard's voice carried the authority that had built an empire. We're not finished. Actually, we are. Victor reached inside his jacket. The door burst open. Agent Chun entered with her weapon drawn, followed by a tactical team. Hands. Where we can see them. Now. Victor's hand froze. Slowly, he raised both hands, his expression shifting from surprise to cold fury. FBI, Chun announced. Victor Volkov, Patricia Morse, you're under arrest for conspiracy, murder, attempted murder, and racketeering. You don't understand, Morse said desperately as agents cuffed her. This goes deeper than you know. People more powerful than your employer Alexei Volkov was arrested yesterday in Prague. Chun cut her off. Along with 43 other members of your organization across 6 countries. It's over. Victor's composure finally cracked. Natasha. That bitch turned. Family loyalty only goes so far, Richard said, standing. Especially when facing life in prison. As agents led them away, Victor turned back. Your wife was smarter than we anticipated. But you? You're just lucky. No, Richard said quietly. I'm a father. And I had help from someone you never counted on, a 7-year-old girl who saw through your lies from day one. After they were gone, Chun approached Richard. You did well. We have everything we need. Is it really over? The organization is finished. We have their files, their contacts, their victims list. Dozens of families will get closure because of what you did here. Richard sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. 2 years of grief, weeks of terror, and it was finally over. Margaret's killers would face justice. Emma was safe. His phone rang. "Martha, Mr. Richard, Emma's asking for you. She says she knows something important happened today. Tell her I'm coming home. And Martha? Tell her the bad people can't hurt us anymore." He heard Martha relay the message, and Emma's voice in the background. "Tell Daddy that Mommy says thank you." Richard's eyes burned with unshed tears. Whether it was imagination or something more, he chose to believe Margaret had been with them through this ordeal. Chun squeezed his shoulder. "Your wife started this investigation. You finished it. She'd be proud." As Richard left the building, he felt a weight lift from his shoulders. The nightmare was over. The monster who'd pretended to care for his daughter was in custody. The network that had destroyed families for profit was dismantled. But more than that, Emma had been right all along. She'd seen through the deception with the clear eyes of a child who knew real love from false. She'd warned him, protected their family in her own small way. Driving home, Richard thought about trust, how it could be shattered, how it could be rebuilt. Emma would need time to heal from this betrayal. They both would. But they'd do it together. With Martha's steady presence and the memory of Margaret's love guiding them, he pulled into their driveway to find Emma waiting on the porch with Martha, holding her mother's music box. She ran to him as he exited the car, throwing her small arms around his waist. "The bad people are gone?" she asked, looking up at him. "Yes, sweetheart, they're gone." Emma nodded solemnly. "Good. Now we can be happy again. Mommy said so." Richard lifted his daughter into his arms, carrying her toward their home. The portrait of 3 generations of Harringtons watched from the foyer as they entered a family legacy preserved against those who would steal it. "Yes," he agreed, kissing Emma's forehead. "Now we can be happy again." Behind them, the sun broke through the clouds for the first time in days, flooding their home with light. 6 months later, the Harrington house hummed with a warmth it hadn't known in years. Spring sunshine flooded through windows, no longer shadowed by fear, and Emma's laughter echoed from the garden where she played with her new friend Sarah from school. Richard stood in his study, holding a letter from the federal prosecutor's office. Natasha Volkov life without parole. Victor Volkov 40 years. Patricia Morse 25 years. The entire inheritance project had fallen like dominoes. Justice served for dozens of families across continents. "Mr. Richard?" Martha appeared in the doorway carrying tea. "The photographer will be here in an hour." The family portrait. It had been Emma's idea, her way of marking their new beginning. She'd insisted Martha be included. "She's family now," Emma had declared with 7-year-old certainty. "Thank you, Martha, for everything." The older woman smiled, setting down the tea service. "Your Margaret would be so proud. The way you and Emma have healed. It's beautiful to see." Through the window, Richard watched Emma teaching Sarah the constellation game Miss Blackwood had once used to gain her trust. But now it was genuine, innocent, free from hidden agendas. Dr. Jennifer Hartley, their family therapist, had worked wonders. Emma's nightmares had faded. Her drawings burst with color again. She still kept her mother's music box close, but now it seemed more treasure than talisman. Richard had healed too, though the scars remained. He'd restructured his business, promoting Sandra to chief operating officer so he could work from home more often. Every afternoon at 3:30, he was there when Emma returned from school. They'd established new rituals: Tuesday chess games, Thursday cooking experiments, Sunday adventures to museums or parks. "Daddy!" Emma burst through the door, Sarah close behind. "Can Sarah see Mommy's music box?" I told her about the secret compartment, of course. Emma carefully opened the box, the ballerina spinning to its eternal melody. "My mommy was very brave," she told her friend solemnly. "She protected us even when she was in heaven." Sarah listened wide-eyed as Emma shared the story, an age-appropriate version they'd crafted with Dr. Hartley. A tale of good triumphing over evil, of love lasting beyond loss. After Sarah's mother collected her, Emma lingered in the study, fingers tracing the music box's painted roses. "Daddy, do you think Mommy knows we're okay now?" Richard knelt beside his daughter. I'm certain of it. I don't dream about her as much anymore, Emma said quietly. Dr. Hartley says that's normal, that it means I'm healing. How do you feel about that? Emma considered this with the gravity children brought to important questions. Sad, but also good. I think Mommy doesn't need to check on us so much, because she knows we're safe. She looked up at him. We are safe now, right? Yes, sweetheart, we're safe. The photographer arrived promptly, an elderly gentleman Martha had known for decades. Someone trustworthy. They gathered in the living room, afternoon light streaming through windows that had witnessed both tragedy and triumph. Where would you like us? The photographer asked. Emma took charge, positioning them by the fireplace. Daddy in the middle, me on one side, Martha on the other. Like a real family. We are a real family, Martha said, her voice thick with emotion. As the photographer worked, Richard thought about the portrait that would soon join the others in the hallway, not replacing the ones with Margaret, but continuing the story. A family rebuilt from loss, stronger for having survived. Later that evening, after Emma was asleep, Richard found himself in Margaret's garden. He'd finally felt ready to tend it again, bringing back the roses she'd loved. He sat on the bench they'd shared during her pregnancy, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. We did it, my love, he whispered to the night. Emma's safe. She's happy. She remembers you with joy now, not just sadness. A soft breeze stirred the roses, carrying their perfume, Margaret's favorite scent. Perhaps it was imagination, but Richard felt a presence, a warmth that had nothing to do with the evening air. His phone buzzed. Agent Shun, checking in as she did monthly. Thought you'd want to know. We just rescued 2 children in Berlin, using intelligence from the Volkov files. The families are reunited. Thank you for telling me. Thank you for having the courage to fight back. How's Emma? Thriving. She started a Safe Friends Club at school, teaching other kids to trust their instincts about adults. Her teacher says she's quite the leader. Chun chuckled. Somehow that doesn't surprise me. Give her my best. After the call, Richard returned. Inside to check on Emma, she slept peacefully, no longer clutching her mother's music box like a shield. It sat on her nightstand, lid open, the ballerina forever frozen mid-dance. In the hallway, he paused at the new addition to their photo gallery, a framed letter from the Department of Justice, commending their role in dismantling an international criminal organization. Emma had insisted on hanging it, so everyone knows we're heroes like Mommy. The house felt different now. Where once shadows lurked in every corner, now there was light. Where silence had reigned, laughter returned. The breakfast table that had hosted a predator now welcomed Emma's friends for playdates. The study where Richard had discovered betrayal became the site of homework help and bedtime stories. They'd established the Richard Harrington Foundation for Family Security, helping single-parent families access better screening resources for childcare. Morrison, finally able to complete the mission Margaret had started, served as head of security consulting. Can't sleep? Martha appeared with her own cup of tea. Just thinking. She joined him in the living room, 2 guardians reflecting on their shared journey. You know what I noticed today? Emma didn't check the locks when she came home from school. First time in months, Richard smiled. I noticed that too. Children heal faster than we think. They just need to feel safe first. Martha sipped her tea thoughtfully. You gave her that. Margaret would be so grateful. We gave her that, Richard corrected. I couldn't have done this without you. They sat in comfortable silence, the house settling around them with familiar creaks and sighs. Somewhere upstairs, Emma murmured in her sleep, not nightmares now, just the ordinary dreams of a 7-year-old whose world had been restored. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Running a business, raising a daughter alone, navigating this complexities of trust after betrayal. But tonight, Richard felt something he hadn't experienced in over 2 years. Peace. The monsters had been vanquished. The family silver was safe. And most importantly, a little girl could sleep soundly, knowing that the people who claimed to love her actually did. As Richard finally headed to bed, he stopped at Emma's door for one last check. She'd kicked off her covers as usual, one arm flung wide in complete relaxation. He tucked the blanket around her, pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Sweet dreams, my brave girl," he whispered Dot in the morning. They'd wake to Martha's pancakes and the sound of birds in Margaret's garden. Emma would chatter about school projects and constellation facts. Richard would pretend to be interested in the intricate politics of second-grade friendships. An ordinary day. A precious, hard-won ordinary day. The music box played its final notes as Richard closed Emma's door, the melody fading into silence. But the song of their survival, their resilience, their love that would play on forever. In the master bedroom, Richard placed Margaret's pearls back in their box one last time. Tomorrow, he'd give them to Emma, along with stories of her mother's courage. She was old enough now to be their keeper, to carry forward the legacy of love that had saved them all. The Harrington family had survived. More than that, they'd learned to live again. And somewhere in the starlight streaming through the windows, Richard could almost swear he heard Margaret's voice on the wind. "Well done, my loves. Well done."